Good morning. I am Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, and I'm here with Ms. Julie Goggin, as well as Attorney Roger Archibald. And we're unfortunate that we're here again talk about another incident involving JetBlue Airlines, airlines that I have used, and many people in the African American community have used this airline often. And we are troubled by what appears to be a systemic practice of having passengers of color specifically, as we're talking today, removed from the airline, which appears to be just inquiries and questions, and treated as though they are not paying customers and receive the same level of customer service that is expected. We believe JetBlue must do a real analysis of how they're treating everyday passengers. And we want them to do a review and to really come up with a clear plan of how do you deal with the common inquiries that anyone would make. An African-American passenger should not be treated differently merely because of an inquiry that is made while on the flight. What happened to Ms. Goggin and her children that were on board with her, an 18-year-old and a 14-year-old, good students, and a professional. We're talking about a woman who has a clear professional credentials and should be treated with the level of respect and dignity that we expect from an airline. And so to go into the details of what happened, we're going to ask Mr. Attorney Roger Archibald, who represented another African-American who was coming home on Thanksgiving Day during the holiday season, attempted to come back to the city on Thanksgiving to spend time with his family. He was treated in the same fashion just for asking a question. And the video of his inquiry was actually shown as he was removed from the airline and had police escort him off. And that is why we believe it's time for JetBlue to really take analysis of what is happening with this airline and how do we move forward in a more appropriate fashion. So I want to turn it over to Attorney Roger Archibald.
Thank you, Eric. It's unfortunate that I am back before you less than 2 months after the Sean Linda issue. My client, Ms. Julie Goggin, and her 2 teenage sons was about to spend the holiday with their family in California. They attempted to board a flight from JFK to Long Beach Airport in California. This was on the 22nd of December of last year. As everyone knows, on JetBlue, you pay extra for extra legroom seats. Ms. Goggin dutifully paid for herself and her 2 sons extra legroom seats. At some point in time, while they were seated in row number 4 and Ms. Goggin was in row number 10, Ms. Goggin saw her sons being escorted to the rear of the aircraft by one of the flight attendants, whose name was Kelsey. One of her sons was placed in row number 16, and the other one was placed in row number 20. When Ms. Goggin inquired as to why her sons were being moved, she was told that it had something to do with weight distribution. Now, on the aircraft, the first 5 seats, so the first 5 rows, is considered extra legroom, and row number 10 is also extra legroom. They were in row number 4. They were the only African Americans in those 5 rows, and they were the only 2 African Americans who were removed to the rear of the aircraft. When Ms. Goggin inquired as to why it is she as a parent was not consulted or discussed and given an explanation, she was shrugged off. Her next question was equally telling, the way in which they responded to her. She wanted to know, okay, fine, I don't have a problem with the weight distribution, but what about the difference in the fare? Because I paid extra for those extra legroom seats. She was told in no uncertain terms that she will not be getting a refund. Ms. Goggin then asked, may I speak to a supervisor? Supervisors came thereafter, and the supervisors then told her, Ms. Goggin, I'm sorry, we're going to have to remove you from the aircraft and your children because the flight attendant is not comfortable with you. Ms. Goggin, let me give you a little bit of background on her. She's a former state prosecutor. She's an attorney. She practices law in the state of New York. Her primary areas is civil rights. She vindicates the rights of others. She knows how to comport herself. She'd never raised her voice. There was no profanity. There was no boisterous conduct. But simply, she was asked a question. She wanted to know why her kids are being moved without her being involved in the process. And for that, she was unceremoniously removed from the aircraft. Yeah, they booked her on another flight, but to add insult to injury, they put her in the regular cabin, even though she paid for extra legroom. And when she inquired again, hey, am I going to be compensated for the difference? She was told no. This is what happened. All she did was ask a question as to why her children was being removed. Now, there are federal statutes that prohibit airlines from engaging in this type of discriminatory conduct. And Ms. Goggin has filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Transportation so she can get redress and JetBlue can stop treating African Americans with disrespect and disdain. And for that, we will see where we go from here. I thank you.
Because the case is ongoing, Ms. Goggin doesn't want to go into the details of the case, but she would just want to give an overview of her travel with the airline as a client of the airline and a frequent user of the airline. Ms. Goggin.
Thank you for coming. I just wanted to say that this whole experience has been personally disheartening, and I'm actually sorry to be here. And I still have some hope and some, unflagging support for an airline that we have used since it launched, I think in 2002. And I'll tell you that my children like the trip on JetBlue as much as, well, not as much as Christmas, but as much as a lot of other things. And so this was particularly galling and jarring. But I have hope that by coming forward, which is uncomfortable for me, that the airline will take a long look at the facts in this matter and not react in a knee-jerk and defensive way, but really take responsibility and make right. Thank you.
And if Attorney Archibald could also give us an update on the Sean case as well and some of the things we're calling for with the airline.
Certainly. In regards to the Linda matter, at the last press conference we had already filed with the Department of Transportation the complaint, and we have since filed the federal lawsuit in U.S. District Court for redress for discriminatory practices in air travel, as well as assault and battery and a host of other state-related claims, and that case is ongoing. And we look forward to having our day in court with that in the event some form of non-litigation decision becomes necessary. Now, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to ask if they don't involve anything that's attorney-client privileged.
Okay.
Have you contacted JetBlue and what is the response?
Well, we have not directly contacted JetBlue, but I believe the U.S. Department of Transportation has, and their response is forthcoming. It has yet to be offered.
Any questions?
Roger, a couple of us walked in late, so we missed your story. Hate to ask you to rehash, but
You can overview the
Well,
story.
I will tell her story.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Goggin,
Just identify who you are.
I am Roger Archibald, counsel for Ms. Goggin. Yeah, Ms. Goggin and her two teenage sons, right before the Christmas holiday on December the 22nd, 2019, was traveling from JFK to Long Beach Airport in California. And they paid for extra legroom seats, and as you know on JetBlue, that puts you in the first 5 rows, and it's also row number 10. The 2 boys were seated in row number 4, and Miss Goggin was in row number 10. At some point in time, she witnessed her sons being escorted to the back of the aircraft by a flight attendant. When that flight attendant came back, she inquired of her as to why my sons were being removed. We paid for extra legroom seats, why are you putting them in the back? She was told that there was a weight distribution issue, and the pilot suggested that some passengers be reseated. She said, I don't have a problem with that, but you could have come and have a discussion with me. After all, I'm their parent, and you know I'm their parent. You saw us check in together. She shrugged off that question. Then Ms. Goggin inquired, well, I would be entitled to some form of refund because I paid for extra legroom and now you're putting them in the regular cabins. She was told, you're not entitled to a refund, you're not getting any refund. And she walked away. Ms. Goggin then requested to speak to a supervisor. A supervisor came on board, and the supervisor then told Ms. Goggin, you will have to deplane, we are going to remove you because the flight attendant is now uncomfortable with your presence on this flight. She said, but for what purpose? She says, the flight attendant is uncomfortable. Supposedly you engaged in boisterous conduct, you were loud, you were aggressive, you were rude. We don't want you on this flight. And she was unceremoniously removed from the aircraft with her 2 sons. Right. Ms. Goggin is a former state prosecutor. She's an attorney. She's now in private practice. The type of law that she practices is civil rights litigation. She vindicates the rights of victims, and now she's victimized. The difficulty here is that Ms. Goggin, in spite of doing all the things you're supposed to do to accomplish things in this country, there's only one thing that that flight attendant saw in Ms. Goggin's opinion, the color of her skin, because no one else was asked to be removed or was asked to be reseated from the extra legroom seats other than her 2 kids. And her 2 kids were the only black or the only African Americans seated in the first 5 rows. The other white passengers, no one else had to be reseated other than her 2 boys. And that's the basis of her claims against JetBlue at this time.
What's happened since she left the plane?
Okay, when she was deplaned, they did rebook her on another flight later that day, not to her destination, but to another airport in California. She was rebooked to Los Angeles, LAX airport, as opposed to the Long Beach airport. Her luggage came on the other flight, so her luggage went to Long Beach and she was sent to Los Angeles. And to add insult to injury, they put her and her boys in the non-extra legroom seats on the subsequent flight, and they didn't reimburse them for the difference because, as you know, there's a difference. You pay for the extra legroom. They refused to, I should say, reimburse her for that. And she has since filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Transportation, and we're in the process of putting together a federal lawsuit in the U.S. District Court of the Eastern District of New York.
I'm assuming once you got off the plane, you were upset, maybe asked to speak to management. Did any manager, any supervisor say any sort of an apology, or what did they have to say to you?
There were two supervisors came. The first supervisor talked to me in the aisle of the plane, and that's when I asked for a manager. And I asked to talk outside the plane, and a manager came, and I spoke to him outside on the jetway, and that person put us back on the plane. And he said, I understand what happened, and I said, you know, my problem is that you're being told stuff that didn't actually happen, and I really have to tell you, I feel targeted. And he said, I understand. It's no sense trying to hash this out here because there's such wide discretion on the aircraft. And I said, I understand. And we got back on the plane. So I was surprised when a second supervisor came down. I know between the first being put back on the plane and the second supervisor asking us to leave, to be rebooked, I spoke to nobody. Nobody. So that's what happened.
Given your experience, how, your experience just as an attorney, how does this make you feel to be in this position?
It's disheartening. I have been a customer of JetBlue since they launched. My children and I, my children especially, look forward to the flight itself. We've had really good experiences with this airline. And you came in a little bit after I spoke. And the reason I don't talk is because this is not exactly what I do, and I have a good lawyer. And I can't remember who said the lawyer who represents herself has a fool for a client, but I believe that. But I'm happy to talk about how, you know, as a customer and as, you know, a resident, an area resident, how upsetting it was and how difficult this was for me and how it was important to lead by example. I do this work, and it's awkward and it's, you know, painful, but I am still hopeful that instead of the knee-jerk kind of legal response that you usually get, that JetBlue takes a good, hard look at things and you know, opens up a dialogue with us. I mean, I want to go back on that airline.
How old are your boys, and do they know what's going on?
Yes, because they're really smart, and they're 14 now and 18.
What's that like, having this conversation with them?
Well, they're smart, and they're nice, and they're kind and ethical, so they're pained but understanding. They're supportive, and they're protective. I'm a widow, and they understand. They understand. They're completely well behaved, and they supported me coming here today. I talked to them before I did.
What's your ideal outcome?
Well, once again, I think that just jumped over into Mr. Archibald's realm.
Well, part of what we would like to have happen here, to piggyback on what the Borough President said earlier, is to have some type of a revamping or recalibration of the training processes and protocols at JetBlue, because simply asking a question shouldn't have you thrown off the plane. So it's bigger than Ms. Goggin's case. It's bigger than Mr. Linda's case. It's JetBlue in terms of how they train their staff to deal with people of African ancestry or minorities in general. Because primarily the folks who are being thrown off of aircrafts flown by JetBlue tend to be African Americans and other minorities. That's what we're hoping for.
Did they explain this weight distribution?
No, they did not. No, they did not.
I'm wondering what that means.
That's a good question for them to respond to, because in all the years of flying with JetBlue and other airlines, I've never heard of that, passengers being switched around because of weight distribution. So they will have to explain what they mean by that.
And I'm sorry, I might have missed this, but did two other people come and sit in the seats that you had paid for your son?
I am not sure about that.
No, they didn't, and you should know, I actually have heard of weight redistribution. And what I said to the flight attendant is, you should have asked. We would have volunteered. We would have volunteered. But the fact is, once you did it, you didn't even see it. My children told you I was sitting here, you knew I was sitting here, and you never spoke to me. And so as far as I know, nobody else sat in the seats, and there looks like a legitimate issue, but I don't know what happened after we left.
And I also, normally when I hear the concept of weight distribution is done with the luggage down below, I'm amazed to find out that passengers, when you board the plane, it was the understanding that when you board the plane, you have the appropriate number of seats, and you take into account the fullness of the plane. I'm a bit surprised to hear that two young men can throw off the entire weight of the plane, and I think that's something that JetBlue has to answer. Second, I think it's time to marry technology with air travel as a safety precaution or as a way of resolving disputes in real time. Maybe our airlines should start having some form of video surveillance inside the actual body of the airplane. It could help. We have a black box if a plane unfortunately gets involved in some form of accident where we can recount what happened. We can also have that same form of video surveillance to determine prior to takeoff any type of dispute or any type of safety issue. You know, now we are at the mercy of passengers that will have a cell phone. I think that we need to go beyond and start using technology to make sure we know what happens in that airline and inside that actual body of the plane. I fly often. Nothing is more humiliating than having a team come to you, have you and your children open the overhead bin, take their luggage, and being escorted off the plane. Her boys are smart young men. They're always going to think about that. Every time they board a plane, every time they see a commercial about a plane, you relive the fact that you're with your family around the holiday season while all the other passengers are sitting there. You and your family, you're taking your luggage down and you're being escorted off the plane. That is in your subconscious. No matter how intelligent we are as individuals, you relive those times when you feel you're being treated differently, and in particular when you add it into young, intelligent men like her son are going to have to always think, am I being treated differently because of my ethnicity? And that is what we want to get at the heart of. JetBlue must do better. And when you hear the fact patterns of what was just explained here about being loud, about being boisterous, those are the same fact patterns that was said about Sean. Sean was talking in a normal voice, and he was told the mere fact he made an inquiry about his seat assignment, again, he was escorted off with the police. And so it is obvious that the mere fact that a question is asked, it is interpreted as you're being disruptive, and I think that's wrong. And that is why we're here, and it's time for JetBlue to really recognize that there's a problem on its airline when it comes down to treating passengers of color. Thank you.
Yes. And I do want to say one more thing, that is, because as of the time that we landed, we took a flight 5 hours later to LAX,